Disclaimer: this episode talks about black magic, and while I don't really go into detail, it also has mentions of fetal dismemberment and cannibalism. So, if that isn't your cup of tea, then please feel free to check out my other episodes. Thank you. It was just past dusk when you arrived at the inn near Newmark. The road weary beneath your boots and the September chill creeping through your coat. Business had been fair. Bolts of linen sold to Bavarian guilds, and you were looking forward to stew, ale, and perhaps a warm bed. He was already there, seated in a dark corner. A man of odd stillness, draped in a long brown cloak. You only noticed him when the innkeeper refused to speak above a whisper while glancing nervously in his direction. When you inquired about him, the innkeeper said that the man called himself Hans, though the name barely fit him. His eyes were the color of rusted iron, quiet, watchful, as if counting not coins, but exits. He spoke little, yet when he did, it was polite, almost too polite. You offered him a drink, as is custom, and he accepted with a slow nod, his pale hands never straying far from the leather satchel beside him. Later that night, you were awoken by the sound of hurried footsteps and a low guttural retching near the stables. You thought it was some drunk, but when you peered outside, you saw no one, only that the stranger's bag had been left behind. Curiosity's a merchant's vice, so you approached it. The leather was damp, too warm, and as you opened the flap, a sickening stench rolled out, coppery, foul. Inside were small bundles wrapped in cloth, some seeping red, and one with what looked unmistakably like a tiny hand. You stumbled back, bile rising in your throat. By sunrise, the town guard had been summoned. The innkeeper, pale as snow, whispered his fears.
That is the one who vanishes like smoke. That is the child killer, and he is no Hans.
They caught him that afternoon, not far from the town square. You saw them drag him, screaming in some unholy tongue as the people spit and threw stones. They found witches' candles, a dagger engraved with symbols, and parts of the unborn in his unholy bag. For days after, you couldn't sleep. The image of that quiet man sipping his ale with such calm civility haunted you worse than any highwayman ever could. That evil, it wore a face you might trust. You have just encountered one of Germany's and history's most successful serial killers, Peter Niers. A rough start. In the year 1540, Germany managed to spawn a boogeyman of such renown that we still talk about him today. A man that was believed to disappear like smoke, shapeshift, and conduct all manner of black magic rituals. Before we talk about Peter Niers directly, let's briefly talk about the environments and events that may have shaped who he would eventually become. Those events were something known as the German Peasants' War, which lasted from about 1524 to 1525. This would be Europe's largest uprising until more than 200 years later with the occurrence of the French Revolution in 1789. Just a quick TLDR on why the German Peasants' War even occurred. Well, serfs weren't happy with the situation they found themselves in. While historians may disagree on the exact cause of it, a few ideas have been thrown around. Rising rents, religious controversies, and even wealthy peasants trying to solidify their social standing in the system are all proposed reasons. I'm inclined to believe it's probably a mix of all those reasons, with the driving factor being the increase in taxes as well as a reduction of rights allotted to the peasants or serf class. So, out of the 300,000 peasants that decided to start a revolution, 1/3 of them were killed. The year-long revolt ended in defeat for the peasants for various reasons. Once they were defeated, the upper class really put the clamps down, and all the issues they had before were exacerbated. It got to the point where peasants were being forced to pay anywhere from 60 to 80% of their harvest in taxes. The people could no longer afford to feed themselves, let alone their animals, for productive crop yields in the long term, and these conditions would actually eventually snowball into the 30 Years' War in 1618. So, in 1525, approximately 100,000 peasants have just been killed off in a relatively concentrated area. That's 100,000 workers gone, basically instantly. People don't exactly grow on trees, so the economies in these regions were absolutely tanked for a couple generations after the failed revolt. What happens when economies fall? Well, crime tends to increase in general, and the crime of murder is believed to have increased by a significant margin during this time frame, around 10% or so, depending on which source you use. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, it might, or it might not. It depends what your beliefs on nature versus nurture are. Peter Niers was definitely born during a rough time in history. Crimes are common, taxes are sky high, you aren't allowed to hunt, fish, or really do anything to sustain yourself because none of that land or the resources on it belongs to you in the eyes of the law. So, times were hard. But then again, how many other people lived under those same conditions and didn't eventually admit to killing over 500 people? I'm willing to bet and say not many. The Black Magic Bandit. Not much is actually known about Peter's early life. We know that he was born in 1540 and executed in 1581. It's also broadly agreed upon that his tenure as a bandit lasted about 15 years, so we'll fast forward past all the bits we have no clue about and start with a 26-year-old Peter. He's young, strong, and probably unsatisfied with how his life is going. I should also say that this next bit is technically unconfirmed. There are no legal documents, but there are time period pamphlets saying that Peter had a mentor in learning his criminal trade. That mentor's name is Martin Stier, who in his own right is also a famous German bandit, serial killer, and black magic practitioner. Martin Stier would eventually be executed in 1572, which would mean he would have had about 6 years to pass on his various skills to Peter. While banditry is a skill set, the learning of black magic is what sets Peter apart from other run-of-the-mill bandits and may offer some type of explanation for why he may have done certain things. At some point after Martin's execution, Peter finds a couple dozen people in the area of Alsace, France, that are more than willing to get their hands dirty. So begins the saga of Peter's roving band of murderers. Anywhere outside of a proper city was dangerous, with the woods, hills, and mountains offering the perfect places for devilish fiends to hide and jump unsuspecting travelers, where they would proceed to rob them of their belongings and their lives. Business must have been booming, and the gang must have gotten a bit too brazen, because in 1577, Peter Niers, along with some other gang members, were actually caught. He was arrested in Gerschbach, Germany, and at this point, I'd like to touch on the fact that the distance from Alsace to Gerschbach is approximately 100 kilometers away. According to Google, 100 kilometers is the equivalent of walking for 24 hours straight at an average speed of 4.2 kilometers per hour. So, for my fellow Americans, we're talking about a total distance of around 63 miles with an average walking speed of 2.6 miles per hour. These numbers are pretty significant because back in those days, people didn't really travel far from where they were born. If you were a peasant, you were pretty much going to spend a majority of your life working on the farm that you were born on, with the exception of going into town like once a week to trade for goods or something else. Maybe an annual fair would roll around. People who had valid reasons for traveling larger distances, like merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, or diplomats, weren't able to cover this distance in a day unless they were really pushing it by horse. On horseback, you could expect to get anywhere from 30 to 40 miles per day, with carts moving as fast as road conditions allowed, and on foot a person might travel 20 to 30 miles. This means that unsuspecting travelers in the area were well within Peter's area of operation for multiple days at a time, no matter how fast you traveled. It's also safe to assume, in my opinion, that his area of operation was 100 kilometers in every direction at this point from Alsace. This is all just 5 years after Martin Stier's execution, so about every year he expands the scope of his territory by approximately 20 kilometers. A wider net means an even steadier supply of victims. So, it's 1577, Peter's just been captured and is swiftly tortured. He confesses to 75 murders, many of them explaining the fate of several missing women that were in the area, and somehow he escapes. This escape really cements Peter's reputation in the area as a sort of boogeyman. During this time period, pamphlets were written and distributed, ballads were sung, and stories were told as a way to warn the public about his cannibalistic tendencies and mastery over black magic. The stories about Peter and his gang became so infamous that it was a common belief that the gang had an actual meeting with the devil in Faussburg, which concluded in the creature of evil giving his blessing to the bandits, paying Peter with a monthly salary, and giving Peter supernatural powers. Powers such as invisibility, shape-shifting into multiple forms like a log, stone, cat, dog, or goat at will, and the ability to move past people unnoticed. The only thing is that these magical spells needed specific, hard-to-get ingredients in order to perform them. Those ingredients are the harvested remains of fetuses. Different parts of a fetus would be used as ingredients or catalysts. Hearts would be eaten to cast spells. Candles made from the flesh and fat of an infant would allow the gang to rob people's homes without them knowing once the candle was lit. After Peter escaped in 1577, a warrant was circulated in 1579, which was based on confessions, most likely under severe torture, from his fellow gang members. These confessions paint Peter in a more mundane light and simply call him a master of disguise. He'd alter his appearance and outfit to look like a soldier, leper, or whatever type of person he needed to be. Even if he changed how he looked, there were some things he didn't or couldn't change about himself. He'd always have a lot of money on his person, carried 2 loaded pistols, and a large 2-handed sword. He was also described as looking rather old, with 2 crooked fingers and a large scar on his chin. For whom the bells toll. The year is 1581, and once again, we don't know much about what Peter was getting up to, but we know that he found himself checking in to an inn called the Bells in Newmarket. After a few days, he decided he wanted to clean himself off at the bathhouse. Before he exited the building, he wanted to leave his precious black magic bag to be kept safe by the innkeeper. After years of having pamphlets, warrants, songs, and stories spread about him, someone at the bathhouse recognized him. 2 citizens would then go on to secretly exit the bathhouse and visit the inn Peter was staying at. They requested that the innkeeper give them Peter's bag, where it was promptly opened. In the bag were several hands and hearts from fetuses. The townspeople acted quickly and formed a gang of 8 men to subdue Peter before he could do any fiendish tricks to escape. He admitted to his identity and confessed to killing 544 people, including 24 fetuses cut out of pregnant women. Just to put things into perspective, in 1577, he'd already confessed to 75 murders. So, in the 4 years after his first confession to now, he'd managed to kill another 469 people. This means after his escape, he killed 117 people every year until his execution ended his murder spree. He would have had to have killed someone every 3 days for 4 years straight in order to achieve these numbers. As another side note, Newmarket, where Peter was ultimately captured, is 363 kilometers from the gang's original start in Alsace. If we continue on with my theory of Peter's gang starting in 1572, after Martin Stier's death, then that means from the gang's inception, it aggressively expanded its territory by 40 kilometers every year until Peter's death. With all this in mind, he was immediately sentenced to be executed. He was publicly tortured and executed over the course of 3 days. We do have a hard date of September 16th, 1581 as his death day, So, on September 14th of the same year is when it all began. On day 1, flesh was torn from his body, and heated oil was poured into the open wounds. September 15th consisted of him being essentially cooked alive because they smeared him with heated oil and held him over glowing coals. September 16th was the third and final day of Peter Niers' execution. He was dragged to the execution area and promptly broken on the wheel. From what I could find, being broken on the wheel consisted of being restrained and then having a heavy wagon wheel smashed all over different parts of the body, breaking all the bones. It's said that Peter was broken on the wheel 42 times and somehow was still alive after the ordeal. It wasn't until he was ultimately quartered that Peter Niers finally joined the land of the dead. An absolutely brutal end for a monstrous man. For those of you that are curious, here's a death ballad written in 1582 after his execution. Prepare your ears because I don't know German. Hort zu ihr frommen Christenleut was seeking kurz verschiedener Zeit. Nulich hat... Well, I'm just going to Google translate this. Listen, you pious Christians, what happened recently. In a town called Enzi, I will tell you about it. Where the royal government is, listen to what happened there. 6 men were captured with a wolf. His name is Peter Niers. He was the bull's companion. Whoever caught him won a great duel. He committed many murders. He confessed this under strict questioning when he was captured. How he murdered 2 large-bellied women in the same area near Pforzheim. I killed them both in a forest called the Hailstorm, and I took the children from their bodies. The English translation sounds a little wonky, but if you were to listen to this in German, it actually does have a rhyme scheme to it and a bit of a tune. So this is probably something that they would sing, basically singing of this man's capture, warning them about his deeds, and it's in a easy to remember fashion, like any other song. And with that goes the story of Peter Niers, the cannibalistic serial killer warlock who is believed to be on Satan's payroll. That concludes this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you enjoyed it, then like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. This is Myths, History, and D&D, and I hope you tune in next time.